Hey everyone, so a lot of you guys have been asking me which is the best camera phone in the premium mid-range segment right now, and today I'm going to be comparing two of such phones, the OPPO Reno 7 Pro and the Vivo V23 Pro. So let's find out which one's a better camera phone in this in-depth comparison. Okay, let's start with the normal daytime images. As you can see, compared to the Reno 7 Pro, the V23 Pro goes a little overboard with saturation and contrast. Now, it all boils down to personal preference, and some people may like such relatively more vibrant shots, which is totally fine. But there are times when such punchy color processing ends up looking too much like in this shot of a flower. I mean, sometimes the toned down colors from the Reno 7 Pro looks a lot more palatable than that from the V23 Pro. Plus, as you can see in this image, Vivo goes a little overboard with red and orange colors at times, because of which it fails to preserve color details. Even so, most of the time I prefer Vivo's output more because it's more pleasing to the eyes. The greens pop out more, the 108 megapixel pinned images yield more details, and the whites look more natural. And there's slightly better HDR processing in Vivo's primary images. But do note that the Reno 7 Pro manages to bring out a more digestible image if the subjects are red or orange, as I mentioned earlier. And if you're someone who likes editing their pictures before uploading on social media, Reno's subtle colors will provide you with more room to do so. Getting to the ultra-wide angle shots, like with primary images, you get a bit of more saturation from the V23 Pro and slightly low saturation on the ones from the Reno 7 Pro once more. Yet, here too, I prefer the ones from Vivo most of the time simply because of how lively they look. In this photo, for example, OPPO's image processing that boosts the shadows up a notch turns the photos a little too flat and almost like a painting. And even though Vivo's processing is not one without flaw, its punchier contrast makes for a more pleasing photo. But if you're someone who favors such brighter images, then you will like what the Reno 7 Pro does. Take this shot of a temple, for instance. Vivo's output is a bit darker, hence OPPO's photos are a bit more favorable here. In terms of details, both are quite similar, but there's some sharpening going on in OPPO's images. Overall, I guess it's basically what you prefer. If you like a bit of a punch in the ultra-wide angle images, Vivo's photos will provide you with that, whereas if you prefer a relatively subtle output, the Reno 7 Pro will fare better. Alright, during normal nighttime shots, the ones from Vivo look quite bright and preserves more detail. While this does work in its favor under relatively low light conditions like this, the way V23 Pro pulls off details in shadows and overexposes the shot looks unnatural most of the times. Still, I will take it over the noisy images from the Reno 7 Pro any day of the week. With night mode turned on, the Reno 7 Pro does clean up the noise by a fair amount, but its bright results mixed with abnormal looking sky don't sit right with me. In some cases, there is even an obvious yellowish and warm tint on its images, contrary to the fairly natural color tone that the V23 Pro accomplishes. Besides landscapes, portraits and selfies are also much better from Vivo, be it in terms of skin tone, colors, or details. These phones can also shoot ultra-wide nighttime photos, but they're nothing spectacular. For starters, images from both cameras look muddy, lacking in detail, and exposure control is not very good in them either. When turning on night mode, the V23 Pro does manage to bring in more light, except that it also introduces this airy greenish hue all over the shot. Anyway, if you've already watched my review of the Vivo V23 Pro, you know that I am a big fan of the portraits from this phone. And in this department, it holds an upper hand against the Reno 7 Pro quite comfortably. In almost all images I took, Vivo has managed to bring out a more vibrant subject and background. OPPO's portraits also maintain good exposure in the background, but the subjects look a bit pale here. And that's not just in comparison to Vivo's portraits, but even its stand-alone results have that lack in punch. Likewise, edge detection is acceptable from either phone. Other than that, detail levels are similar too. Okay, so like the portraits, Vivo retains superior skin tones on the selfies as well. As you can see, the ones from the Reno 7 Pro look noticeably reddish under practically every lighting condition. Zooming in a little bit, I found that there's a hint of smoothing going on here too. The V23 Pro is slightly heavy on the yellowish hue, yes, but that works in favor of people with brown skin tone like me. Moreover, highlight control and even details are better here on most occasions. Portrait selfies tell a similar story in terms of color science, details and such, alongside a similar level of edge detection, which is not perfect, by the way. Alright, moving to the videography side of things, sadly both phones skip on OIS and feature EIS only. Regardless, the V23 Pro can hit up to 4K 60 FPS, whereas the Reno 7 Pro maxes out at 4K 30 FPS recordings only. Under this, you can even turn on the steady mode on the V23 Pro that crops in a little for a steadier shot. On the contrary, the 4K 30 FPS videos from the Reno 7 Pro are simply too wobbly and surprisingly oversaturated too, and sadly the camera does not support ultra steady mode here. Even the background noise cancellation from its microphone is lackluster compared to the V23 Pro. In 1080p 60 FPS, the Reno 7 Pro does offer some form of stabilization by cropping in the footage. Apart from this, it also dials down the saturation levels by a whole lot here than the 4K 30 FPS mode, to the point where footages look a little too dull. As a result, I am still fond of videos from the V23 Pro at both 1080p 60 or 30 FPS because of the better color science, contrast, and audio pickup. For selfie videos, well, Vivo's ability to shoot at 4K 60 FPS gives it a straight edge over the 1080p limit on the OPPO Reno 7 Pro, and Vivo's audio pickup is also relatively better. At 1080p 30 FPS, both phones manage to bring out stable results, although if you're more serious for vlogging, Vivo is a better option of the two. Alright, to conclude, I guess it's more than fair to say that the Vivo V23 Pro is the better camera phone of the two. Although its slightly oversaturated color processing could certainly use a bit of rework in some instances, it manages to deliver much more pleasing photos overall. This is especially true with human subjects, where it preserves skin tones much more accurately as opposed to the Reno 7 Pro. Not to forget, the V23 Pro sweeps an easy victory on the videography front too. Also, I missed this earlier, but Vivo has an additional ultra-wide-angle sensor on the front, which comes handy when taking group selfies. However, that's not to say that the Reno 7 Pro has terrible cameras. If you're someone who prefers a comparatively flatter color profile, I am sure that you will like OPPO's results in most cases. So guys, that was all for our camera comparison between the Vivo V23 Pro and the OPPO Reno 7 Pro. Do let us know which one is your favorite in the comments below. Till then, I'm Pratima and I will see you in my next video.